The first thing Emily noticed about the Miller house was how the porch wrapped around it like a patient arm. The second was the sound, the steady tick of a grandfather clock inside, and beneath it, the hush of a Georgia evening, cicadas droning, a screen door tapping in a shifting breeze. The house sat just off a two-lane road outside Ashford, a town made of brick storefronts, church bells, and yard sales. It had been someone's forever once. It wasn't hers yet. She arrived on a Sunday, wedding bands still bright on her hand, dress replaced by jeans and a cotton shirt that stuck to the humidity. Daniel hauled her suitcase up the steps and brushed a kiss against her hairline, already halfway turned toward his truck. He was home for 48 hours between project sites, this time a hospital build in Houston, and everything he did suggested he was on his way out. Restless fingers, glance at his watch, keys clutched before he needed them. "It's not forever," he said. 6 months, tops. He meant the travel. He meant living with his father. He meant the distance between where their marriage had started and where it stood now. Emily followed him into the foyer. The house smelled faintly of lemon oil and old books. Photographs lined the wall, black and white wedding portraits, a boy in a Little League uniform with a crooked cap, a woman with a grin that pushed up one side of her face. That was Margaret. Emily recognized the eyes from stories Daniel told when he told stories at all. Richard waited in the kitchen, hands folded, shirt tucked into slacks, as if dinner required a tie. His hair was silver, trimmed short, with a part that hadn't shifted in 40 years. When he looked up, she felt catalogued, studied, then gently set aside. "Emily," he said. "Welcome." "Thank you," she replied, and was surprised by how small her voice sounded in the room. They ate at the oak table beneath a light that hummed faintly. Fried chicken, green bean, cornbread. The kind of food that suggested comfort even when comfort didn't show. Daniel narrated the highway home with his father, each mile marking a topic that could be covered quickly: gas prices, ball scores, weather patterns. Richard listened, nodded once. When Emily reached for a second piece of cornbread, the plate tipped. The butter dish slid, skidded, smashed on the tile. "I'm so sorry," she said, on her knees before the shards. "I'll clean it." Richard had already stood, already fetched the broom. "It's just a dish," he said. His voice carried neither irritation nor forgiveness. He swept methodically, breathing quiet, as if the motion of gathering broken things was muscle memory. That night, Daniel's duffel bag lay open on their bed like a mouth. They had chosen the back bedroom because the front room held Margaret's furniture, and no one used that anymore. Emily stacked socks while Daniel folded shirts with military corners. He leaned in to kiss her, the way a person leans into a routine. She leaned back, wanting to mean it and not entirely sure how. "When you get lonely," he said, "Dad reads in the evenings. He's not unfriendly. Just him." "I'll be fine," she said. Emily had grown up making space around other people's needs. Her mother, Linda, worked double shifts at the diner for most of Emily's childhood, and any men that appeared in their kitchen did not tend to last through the season. She had learned to do her own laundry at 11 and to balance a checkbook at 16. Love, when it came, seemed safer if it looked like structure. Daniel left before dawn the next morning, the rumble of his truck bleeding into the cicadas' last song. Emily lay awake in the half-dark listening to the house. The clock downstairs kept time. The refrigerator shuddered. Something expanded and settled behind the drywall. When she finally rose, the sunrise threw pale squares onto the hallway rug, and a dust finger caught in it, spinning. Richard was in the yard with a watering can, careful not to drown the hydrangeas. Emily made coffee and scrambled eggs, and when he came in he said, "Thank you," as if she were a neighbor and not the woman who had married his son. They ate in companionable quiet, the kind that had to be practiced. After breakfast, she unpacked. The dressé drawer stuck à fouet. In the top one, she found a stack of recipe cards in neat, looping script, Margaret's handwriting. Lemon bars. Pot roast. A tea blend, chamomile with apple peel and a pinch of mint. Emily held the card, thumb smoothing where time had softened the edges. She set it aside and kept going. Her hands liked having a task. In the afternoon, she worked the house. The living room held a blue couch with a sun-faded arm and a quilt folded so straight it looked ironed. The dining room held a sideboard with the good plates behind glass. In the hallway, the old photographs had labels penciled on their backs: Richie, age 8, M&R, 1987, Daniel, prom night. Margaret's grin appeared in more than one. Emily paused before a wedding portrait, Margaret in lace, Richard younger, angular, handsome in a straightforward way. He held himself like a man who knew the right answer on a test. Her mother had once said, "You can recognize a certain kind of loneliness in a man's posture if you pay attention." Emily hadn't understood then. She wondered now. She found the laundry room off the kitchen, its shelf stocked with detergent, clothespins, and a tin labeled button jar. She found the back steps that led down to a patch of clover and a small garden bed with tomatoes staked up. She found a book left open on the sunroom chair, a dog-eared copy of Steinbeck, with a slip of paper marking a page and a grocery list scribbled across its blank edge: milk, salt, cat food, coffee. Cat food? The stray showed up just before dusk, a gray tabby with a notch out of one ear. He skulked by the porch, sniffed, and declared ownership of the swing by sprawling under it. Emily crouched, extended 2 fingers. The cat considered, pressed his forehead into her knuckles. She laughed, surprised at the sound. Richard watched from the doorway. "He's a regular," he said. "We call him Frank. He comes when he wants." "Like most men," she said, then blushed, regretting the joke. Richard's mouth tipped, the barest hint of a smile. She wondered if Daniel had ever noticed his father's near smiles, or if noticing was something you learned to do only after you'd lost the need for words. They ate leftovers that night. Emily set 2 plates and, on impulse, a saucer of milk on the steps for Frank. Rain threatened, the air swollen with it, but the storm held off. After dinner, Richard took his book to the sunroom and read beneath a lamp with a yellow shade. Emily washed dishes, dried them, put them away as if placement mattered. She carried 2 mugs of tea into the sunroom, the recipe card's instructions followed by instinct. Steam curled up. Richard lowered his book and accepted the mug. "It's Margaret's blend," Emily said, then wished she hadn't. He lifted it to his face, closed his eyes, breathed in. When he drank, something eased at his jawline. Not grief exactly, and not its opposite. The memory of comfort, Meb. He set the mug down, thumb smoothing the chipped rim. "She made it on Sunday nights," he said, "when the week felt too long." "I found the recipe in the drawer," Emily said. "I hope that's okay." "It's your kitchen too," he said, then looked surprised that he'd said it. They did not talk after that. He read. She watched the rain finally arrive, slow at first, then steady, stitching the yard to the sky. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her. A text from Daniel, "Made it. Long day tomorrow. Be good." She typed back, "Be safe." The dot pulsed, then vanished. She turned the ringer off. When she went upstairs later, the hallway seemed different. Not warmer, not yet, but less like a museum. She stood at the bedroom window and watched the porch sway empty, the gray cat curled beneath it, a comma at the end of a sentence. "In bed, sleep comme une pièce." She dreamed of recipes written in a hand that wasn't hers, of porches and rain and the way someone saying your name just once can sound like a doorway opening. She woke to the grandfather clock chiming 2. The house shifted, settled. Somewhere, a man turned a page. Somewhere, a cat shook rain from its back. Emily lay on her side and counted the ticks between chimes, the way she used to count between thunder and lightning. She told herself this was the start of something simple. She did not yet know how complicated simple could be. The days settled into a rhythm, though it was one Emily often felt she was borrowing rather than building. Richard rose early, made coffee strong enough to strip paint, and walked the yard with the deliberation of someone who measured time by chores rather than clocks. Emily worked remotely, graphic design projects sent from a small firm in Atlanta, and when deadlines weren't pressing, she drifted through the house like a polite guest. The silence between them was not unfriendly. It was, she realized, cultivated. Richard spoke when necessary, and when he did his words carried weight, like tools set carefully back in a box. Emily filled the gaps with podcasts or music, though she kept the volume low, as if she feared disturbing the old plaster walls. One Thursday afternoon, rain kept her from a planned walk. She busied herself in the kitchen instead, the kind of day that made her want to cook something slow. Pulling open the sideboard drawers for utensils, she stumbled again upon Margaret's recipe cards. They were bundled in a faded ribbon, now frayed to threads. She held them in her lap at the table, tracing the cursive loops. Some cards bore smudges of flour, others faint stains of sauce. Margaret had written notes in the margins, too salty, cut in half, or Daniel loved this at age 10. Emily's fingers hovered over one card in particular. Evening Tibblent. She had made it once, but now she studied it closer. Chamomile, dried apple peel, mint, a touch of honey stirred after steeping. It was simple, but the handwriting itself carried intimacy. This wasn't a recipe for public sharing, it was a ritual. She checked the pantry. By chance or fate, most ingredients were there. She sliced a bit of apple skin, set the kettle on, and let the fragrance fill the kitchen. The scent was calming but also haunting, like opening a trunk of someone else's letters. When Richard came in from the yard, damp from the drizzle, she met him with a steaming mug. "I hope you don't mind," she said, almost apologizing. "I found this in Margaret's recipe box." He paused in the doorway, boots leaving prints on the mat. His gaze dropped to the mug, then back to her face. He took it without a word, lifted it beneath his nose, inhaled. For a long second, his shoulders seemed to loosen. "She used to make this," he said finally, voice low. "Sunday nights mostly. Said it helped her sleep." Emily nodded. "I thought it might be nice." Richard sipped. His eyes closed, and though his expression didn't change much, Emily sensed something shift in him, like a door opening slightly to let in air. He sat at the table, and without planning it, she sat across from him. They drank in silence. The rain tapped steadily at the windows, and the clock chimed the half-hour. It wasn't conversation, but it wasn't empty either. Emily realized the difference between silence that pressed down and silence that held you. Later, as she washed their cups, Richard lingered by the counter. "You did it right," he said. "Most people steep it too long." She smiled faintly, surprised by his approval. The recipe was clear. He looked at her then directly, his eyes a shade between gray and blue, tired but steady. Margaret always wrote things down. She believed in keeping track. Said memory was too slippery otherwise. Emily thought of her own mother, Linda, who had scribbled grocery lists on napkins but rarely preserved anything beyond necessity. Linda's life had been lived forward, never pausing long enough to capture what slipped away. Emily sometimes wished she had left behind words, recipes, or anything that might have explained the silences of Emily's childhood. That night, alone in her room, Emily reread a message from Daniel. "Another late shift. I'll call this weekend." His words were affectionate in function but not in tone. She imagined him in a hotel bed, TV flickering across white sheets, phone face down beside him. She wondered if he felt the weight of their absence from each other or if it had already become routine. Friday evening brought an unexpected visitor. Emily was sweeping the porch when a car pulled into the gravel drive. A neighbor, she guessed, a woman in her 60s with curly hair under a rain bonnet. She carried a basket of peaches. "I'm Ruth from down the road," she announced cheerfully. "Figured you might need a welcome gift. Don't see Daniel much, but I heard he brought a wife home." Emily flushed. "I'm Emily. That's very kind of you." Richard joined them on the porch, his expression neutral but not unkind. Ruth's chatter filled the air, stories of church suppers and yard sales. Before she left, she glanced knowingly between Emily and Richard, as though she sensed the oddness of their arrangement. "Don't be strangers," she said, patting Emily's arm. After she left, Emily turned to Richard. "Do you think people talk?" Ich shrugged. "Small towns run on talk. Best not to feed it." Her cheeks warmed. "I don't want to cause problems." "You haven't." His answer was firm, almost protective. The days continued. Emily worked, cooked, occasionally walked to the small grocery in town. Richard kept his routines. And yet, every evening around 7, she found herself boiling water, steeping the chamomile, slicing apple peel. She brought 2 mugs into the sunroom, and without asking, Richard joined her. Sometimes he read. Sometimes she scrolled her laptop. But gradually, words began to slip in. He told her about teaching history for 30 years at the high school, about students who came back years later to thank him or to remind him of things he'd said he didn't remember. She told him about art school, how she'd nearly quit when her mother couldn't afford the tuition, until she landed a scholarship she hadn't expected. They didn't talk about Daniel much. When his name came up, Richard's sentences grew shorter, and Emily felt both relief and unease. She wondered if Richard saw in his son the same restlessness she did. One evening, Emily asked, Did Margaret write much besides recipes? Richard leaned back in his chair. Journals. Boxes of them. She wrote every day. I haven't touched them since she passed.
Emilies ad bit quicker.
The idea of those journals upstairs, filled with a woman's voice she never knew but whose presence lingered in every room, it was like knowing a ghost lived among them. She wanted to ask to see them but didn't. Not yet. Later, in bed, she couldn't sleep. Rain had cleared, leaving the air sharp. She thought of Daniel's absence, of Ruth's knowing eyes, of Richard sipping tea with his head bowed like he was listening for something in the steam. She turned over, staring at the ceiling. The silence in the house no longer felt empty. It felt waiting. The next morning, she opened the drawer again. The recipe cards were shuffled, perhaps by her own handling, perhaps by time. Beneath them, she noticed a smaller stack of envelopes tied with string. The paper yellowed, edges curled. The top one bore Margaret's name, but the handwriting was not hers.
Emilie Froze, Pulse Rising.
It was her mother's. Linda's. She traced the letters, certain of it. She had seen that script on birthday cards, on report cards signed with a flourish. What was her mother's handwriting doing in this house, in Margaret's drawer? She set the envelopes back quickly, as though she'd touched fire. The kettle whistled behind her, forgotten on the stove. She grabbed it, poured water into a mug with shaking hands. Steam rose, clouding her vision. When Richard entered, she startled so visibly that he paused. Are you all right? He asked. Emily nodded too quickly. Just burned my hand a little. He studied her, suspicion faint in his eyes but softened by restraint. He didn't press. Emily turned away, pressing her palms against the counter. The letters were real. Her mother's presence was here, in this house, tethered somehow to Margaret, to Richard, to the life Emily had stepped into without knowing the history beneath it.
The ticoul dans the kunte, intouched.
For the first time since she arrived, Emily wondered not just who she was in this house, but who she was in its story. Emily couldn't stop thinking about the letters. All day she worked with her laptop open at the dining table, but her eyes blurred over lines of text and colors on her screen. Every time she paused, her mind returned to the drawer upstairs, the string around those envelopes, the unmistakable handwriting of her mother. By mid-afternoon, she gave in. Richard had gone into town for groceries, his slow pickup rattling down the driveway. The house was hers for the moment. She climbed the stairs, her steps soft against the carpet runner, though no one was there to hear. In the bedroom that had belonged to Margaret, sunlight angled through lace curtains, cutting strips across the floor. Emily opened the drawer again, and there they were, the envelopes, tied in faded blue string, edges curled like autumn leaves. Her hands shook as she untied the knot. The first letter was dated June 1986.
Emilies Briscocht.
That was years before she was born.
The address on the top corner, Linda Carter.
Her mother's maiden name.
And Beneat, dit Richard.
She sank onto the bed and read. The handwriting was familiar, flowing but urgent. Linda wrote about meeting Richard at a summer teachers' conference in Savannah. She described late-night conversations about books, history, and the loneliness of feeling misplaced in their own lives. She wrote of Margaret, of her kindness, of the guilt Linda felt for the pull she couldn't ignore. And then, in one trembling sentence, I know we can never be, not truly, but part of me will always wonder what it might have felt like to choose you instead. Emily's chest tightened. She read the letter twice, 3 times. Her mother, practical, hard-edged, always too busy to speak of dreams, had loved another man. And that man was Richard, the father of her husband. She pressed the paper to her lap, stunned. A strange clarity washed over her, the echoes she'd felt since moving into this house, the sense of being tethered to something older, heavier than her own choices. It was not imagined. It was inheritance.
She shuffled through the stack.
There were more letters, spanning years, though not many. Maybe 6 in all. Each carried the same conflicted tone, longing, restraint, resignation. Linda wrote about her marriage unraveling, about the struggle to raise Emily alone. She never wrote explicitly of Richard after the first few, but she circled back in allusions, in phrases like, I think of the conversations that steadied me once, or, your silence was kinder than words could have been. The last letter was undated. It ended simply, if you ever read this, know I chose the life I had because it gave me Emily. But I am sorry for the questions that never leave me. Emily pressed her hand over her mouth. The letters weren't sent, they were tucked away, as if Margaret herself had discovered them and saved them in her drawer.
Did Margaret know?
Had Richard ever read them? The creak of the front door downstairs startled her. She shoved the letters back into the drawer, retied the string, and closed it just as footsteps sounded on the stairs. Richard appeared in the doorway, carrying a paper bag. "You didn't answer when I called out," he said.
"Thought you might be upstairs."
"I was just looking around," Emily managed, forcing her voice steady. He set the groceries down on the dresser and studied her. His eyes weren't accusing, just observant, like always. She couldn't tell whether he knew what she had seen. That evening, at the tea ritual, Emily found herself watching him too closely. Every motion of his hands, every line of his face, she searched for clues. Did he ever think of Linda now? Did he see her daughter sitting across from him and remember those old words, those unsent promises? Was Margaret a writer? Emily asked suddenly, her voice too sharp in the quiet. Richard looked up from his book. In her way. Journals, mostly.
And letters.
He paused. Everyone writes letters. Why? Emily shook her head quickly.
Just curieux.
She regretted asking immediately. He studied her for a long moment, then returned to his reading. But Emily could feel the air between them shift, as if they were both holding something they wouldn't name. That night, sleep refused to come.
Emily lay awake, staring at the shadow of tree branch on the ceiling.
Her thoughts tangled. Her marriage to Daniel already felt fragile, stretched thin by distance and neglect. And now beneath it, she discovered her life was entangled with her mother's in ways she couldn't untangle. The man who had become her reluctant companion over tea was the same man her mother once loved in secret. In the days that followed, she tried to act normal. She cooked, worked, chatted politely with Ruth when the neighbor stopped by with tomatoes. But she caught herself glancing toward Richard, hearing her mother's words echo in the silence between them. "I know we can never be." That phrase clung to her, a warning and a temptation both. On Saturday, Daniel called. She sat on the porch swing with Frank the cat on her lap, phone pressed to her ear. He sounded tired, his voice clipped. "Work's crazy," he said. "Maybe another month before I can get home." Emily swallowed.
"I miss you."
"Miss you too," he replied, distracted. She could hear a TV in the background, voices overlapping.
"Listen, I've got to go."
"We'll talk more this weekend." After the call ended, she stared at the gravel drive, throat tight. The distance between them felt larger than miles. She wanted to tell him about the letters, about the quiet that wasn't empty anymore, about the way she was starting to see her life differently. But how could she? He was already gone, even when he spoke. That evening, rain threatened again. Emily brought 2 mugs of tea to the sunroom. Richard accepted his without comment, but after a while, he set it down and looked at her directly. "You've been distracted," he said. She froze. "Just work." His eyes lingered on her, steady and unyielding. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the past finds its way into the present whether we invite it or not." Emily's heart stuttered. Did he know about the letters? Was he warning her, or confessing? She wanted to ask, to force the truth out into the open, but her throat closed around the words. Instead, she sipped her tea, the warmth burning her tongue. She nodded as if she understood, though the truth was she understood too much and not enough all at once. When she went to bed that night, she took one letter with her, tucked beneath her pillow. She read it under the dim glow of the lamp, tracing each line until the words blurred. Her mother's voice was clear, aching, alive in the ink. And for the first time, Emily felt the past pressing on her not as history, but as inheritance, an unfinished story she had somehow stepped into, with no clear way out. The storm rolled in just after dusk. Emily had seen the warning on her phone that afternoon, heavy rain, thunder, maybe tornado winds, but she hadn't expected how quickly the sky would bruise. By 7, the horizon had swallowed the sun. By 8, rain struck the roof in sheets, and wind bent the trees like matchsticks. She stood at the window of her bedroom, arms wrapped around herself, watching the world blur. Thunder rattled the panes. Downstairs, the grandfather clock chimed, but the sound was almost drowned by the weather. She thought of Daniel in some hotel across the country, maybe eating takeout while the TV droned. Did he ever wonder what storms sounded like here, without him? A crack of lightning split the sky, followed by a crash so close the house shook. Emily flinched. The power flickered, then died, leaving her in darkness. She grabbed her phone, its weak glow trembling in her hand, and padded downstairs. Richard was already in the kitchen, a flashlight set on the counter. He'd lit 2 candles, their flames casting tall shadows against the cabinets. "Transformers out," he said calmly. "This happens once or twice every summer." Emily nodded, trying to steady her breath. The wind shrieked outside, carrying with it the sound of branches snapping. She had always disliked storms, ever since she was a child hiding under blankets as her mother told her not to be afraid. But fear was a muscle memory, and it tightened now in her chest. Richard poured water into a kettle, set it on the gas stove, and lit a match. The hiss and flame seemed absurdly normal in the chaos outside. "Tea?" he asked. Emily almost laughed at the steadiness of it. "Always tea." They sat at the table with their mugs, candlelight flickering. The storm pressed around them, rattling windows, howling through the eaves. Richard seemed unaffected, sipping slowly, eyes half closed. Emily clutched her mug with both hands. "You're afraid," he said, not unkindly.
She exhaled.
"I've always hated storms. My mom used to say I had a nervous soul." "Linda," he said softly, as if tasting the name. Her head snapped up.
"You knew her."
The words hung between them. His eyes were unreadable, shadows shifting across his face. For a moment, she thought he might deny it. But then he nodded once. "Yes. A long time ago." Emily's heart thudded. She set her mug down carefully, fingers trembling.
"He found letters."
"In Margaret's drawer." Richard didn't move. He didn't ask which letters. He only sighed, the kind of sigh that carries years of silence. "I wondered when you would." Her throat closed. "Why didn't you tell me that you knew her?" "Because it wouldn't have mattered. It was the past."
"Not to me." Her voice cracked.
"She wrote things I never knew about."
"Things about you."
The thunder rolled, shaking the table. Richard's gaze didn't leave hers. "We cared for each other. That's true. But we also cared enough not to cross a line we couldn't uncross." Emily swallowed hard.
Did Margaret know? Et hésitait-elle?
Yes. She knew. And she forgave me for what I felt, because feelings are not the same as actions. Emily's chest tightened. The echo of her mother's words from the letters returned. "I know we can never be." She wondered if Margaret had read those words, had folded them away, and carried her own silent grief.
Richard's voice grew softer. "Linda loved you. She chose you."
Whatever questions she had, you were the answer.
The storm screamed against the windows, and tears blurred Emilie's vision.
She had wanted answers, but now that they were here, they felt heavier than she could bear. For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was rain hammering the roof and the steady tick of the clock in the darkened hallway. Finally, Richard said, "Sometimes life leaves us with unfinished stories. The mistake isn't feeling them. The mistake is letting them decide the rest of our lives." Emily wiped her cheek.
"And what about now? What about me and you?"
It was the first time she had said it aloud, the thing that had been circling in silence between them. The attraction she hadn't meant to name. The way her heart sometimes steadied in his presence, the way her mother's letters had made everything more complicated, not less. Richard leaned back, shadows deepening the lines of his face.
"You're my son's wife."
"I know," she whispered. His jaw tightened. He didn't look away. "That means everything else must stop here." But his voice wasn't entirely steady. The storm's howl seemed to fill the cracks in his resolve, and Emily felt the room tilt. She wanted to argue, to confess that Daniel was already absent, that her marriage was hollow, that what she felt now was more real than the texts that arrived at odd hours with no warmth. But the words stuck. The cat, Frank, darted in from the porch then, soaked and yowling.
The interruption broke the moment.
Richard rose, fetched a towel, and crouched to dry the animal. His hands, steady and gentle, moved with a tenderness that made Emily ache. When the storm finally eased, the candles had burned low. Emily excused herself, heart pounding, and climbed the stairs. In her room, she pressed her palms to her face, trying to breathe. The conversation replayed in her mind: her mother, Margaret, Richard, the boundaries he spoke of, the boundaries she felt already bending. She sat at her desk and pulled out one of the letters again. By candlelight, her mother's words seemed alive, pulsing. "I chose the life I had because it gave me Emily." Emily whispered into the quiet, "And what am I supposed to choose?" She didn't sleep until dawn. The next morning, the air smelled of wet earth. Branches littered the yard, but the house had survived untouched. Richard was already outside, clearing debris. Emily watched him from the window, his movements deliberate, his posture unbroken by the storm. She wondered how many storms he had withstood, both weather and otherwise. Later, when Daniel called, Emily answered with a voice too bright. He asked about the storm, about the house. She told him everything was fine, that Richard had managed it well, that she was safe. But she didn't tell him about the letters. She didn't tell him about the silence that had cracked open into confession. She didn't tell him about the way she had asked the question she should never have spoken. When the call ended, she placed her phone face down on the table. The tea kettle whistled. She filled 2 mugs, added apple peel and mint, and carried them to the sunroom. Richard joined her, as if nothing had changed. But Emily knew everything had. Emily had just finished tidying the kitchen when she heard the crunch of tires on gravel. For a split second, her chest leapt, then froze. It was too early in the week for deliveries, and Richard was in the yard trimming hedges. She wiped her hands on a towel and stepped to the porch. Daniel's truck pulled in, dust rising behind it. He climbed out with his duffel slung over his shoulder, wearing the same khakis and polo he wore to job sites. His face looked tired, unshaven, but his eyes lit when he saw her. "Surprise," he said, arms opening as he came toward her. Emily managed a smile, though her pulse raced for reasons she didn't want to name. "You didn't say you were coming." "Job's delayed. I thought I'd get a few days at home. Missed you." He kissed her, and she let him, stiff at first, then softer. It felt familiar, like slipping into an old jacket, but also distant, as if she were playing the part of a wife in a photograph. Richard appeared from around the corner, gloves in hand. Daniel grinned and clasped his father's shoulder. "Thought I'd give you both a break from each other," he joked. Emily's throat tightened. Richard's expression didn't shift, but his eyes flicked toward her, quick and unreadable. That evening, Emily cooked chicken casserole, green beans, biscuits. Daniel talked endlessly, stories from Houston, colleagues, construction delays. He cracked jokes, filling silence the way he always had. Emily laughed where she should, but her gaze strayed to Richard across the table, his steady hands cutting food, his eyes mostly lowered. After dinner, Daniel reached across and squeezed Emily's hand. "Let's take a walk. Just us." They walked down the lane under stars still veiled by storm clouds. Gravel crunched beneath their shoes. Daniel slipped his hand into hers. "You've been quiet lately. Everything okay?" Emily hesitated. "It's just been different. Adjusting to being here." "You don't have to stay here if it's too weird," he said. "We can get an apartment in town until the project's done." She shook her head. "No, it's fine. Your father's been kind." Daniel chuckled. "Kind? That's a first." Then he grew serious. "I know he can be hard. He never really knew how to talk to people. Mom dit d'Oldette. But I appreciate you trying with him." Emily looked away. The weight of her mother's letters pressed against her memory. Words she couldn't share clogged her throat. "It's not hard. Just quiet." Daniel squeezed her hand again. "I'll try to get home more often. I don't want you lonely here." She wanted to say she was lonely even when he was with her, but the words wouldn't come. Instead she murmured, "That would be nice." Later that night, when they returned, she noticed Daniel linger near the sunroom. His brow furrowed at the pair of mugs left on the side table, still faintly scented with chamomile and apple. "You and Dad having tea parties now?" he teased, though his voice held an edge. Emily forced a laugh. "It's just something to pass the time." He said nothing more, but she saw the thought root itself in his mind. The next morning, Daniel suggested they drive into town. Emily agreed, though she felt tension coiled in her chest. They stopped at Ruth's produce stand. Ruth beamed at Daniel, then glanced between them, her eyes curious. Good to see you two together, she said warmly. We've all been wondering when you'd be home.
Emily flushed.
Daniel frowned. On the drive back, he said, why would she say that? Small town talk, Emily said quickly. They notice when people come and go. But Daniel's silence afterward was heavy. That afternoon, as Daniel napped, Emily sat on the porch with her laptop. Frank the cat curled at her feet. She tried to focus on work, but every sound inside made her jump. When she glanced up, Richard was in the garden, shoulders bent as he worked the soil. She wanted to walk to him to say something, anything, but Daniel's truck sat in the drive, a silent reminder of boundaries. The tension broke that evening. They were clearing dinner when Daniel asked suddenly, so what do you two talk about when I'm not here? Emily froze, a plate in her hands. What? He leaned against the counter, arms crossed.
You and Dad.
Tea every night, Ruth making comments.
What is going on?
Richard, sitting at the table with his book, looked up sharply. Daniel. I'm asking her, Daniel snapped. Emily's pulse raced.
Nothing is going on.
We just share tea. That's all. Since when does Dad drink tea?
Daniel's voice rose.
He's a black coffee man. Always has been. Richard set his book down. People can change, son.
Daniel's eyes narrowed.
Or maybe they're changing for someone else.
The air thickened.
Emily's throat ached. She opened her mouth, but Richard spoke first, steady, firm.
You're imagining things. Don't make trouble where there isn't any.
Daniel's laugh was sharp.
That is rich, coming from you.
He looked at Emily again, eyes searching.
Tell me I'm wrong.
She wanted to, desperately. But the hesitation, half a second too long, was enough.
Daniel's face hardened.
You've got to be kidding me, he muttered, shoving away from the counter. He stormed out the back door, the slam echoing through the house. Emily sank into a chair, shaking. Richard remained at the table, jaw tight, hands gripping the book he hadn't touched. After a long silence, he said quietly, "This is exactly what I feared."
Tears pricked her eyes.
I didn't mean for it to happen. I know. His voice broke slightly. But meaning doesn't undo what's done. They sat in silence, listening to the cicadas begin their night chorus, the grandfather clock ticking toward another hour. When Daniel returned late that night, his footsteps were heavy, deliberate. He didn't look at Emily as he slid into bed. She lay stiff beside him, staring at the ceiling, feeling the chasm between them widen into something that might never close. The next morning, Daniel left early, claiming errands. Richard avoided Emily's gaze at breakfast. The tea ritual was broken. Emily stared at her mug, untouched. The comfort she had found in that simple act now felt like evidence, like guilt in ceramic form. She realized the storm had not passed. It had only just begun. The house felt different after Daniel's outburst. The easy silences that Emily and Richard had once shared were now edged with tension, as though even the walls had overheard and were keeping score. Daniel moved through the rooms with clipped steps, his eyes avoiding hers. He stayed outside longer, hammering nails into loose boards on the shed or running the mower over grass that didn't need cutting. When he was inside, the air felt sharp, filled with unsaid things. Emily spent more time upstairs, working at the small desk in her bedroom. Yet her attention kept drifting to the drawer in Margaret's room, the drawer that held her mother's letters. She had read one already, and it had cracked her life open. The rest called to her, quiet but insistent, like voices she had to hear to understand the whole story. On a Tuesday afternoon, when Daniel drove into town for supplies, she gave in. The rain had returned, soft this time, blurring the view from the lace-curtained window. Richard was in the garden, bent over the tomato plants. Emily slipped into Margaret's room, closed the door, and pulled the drawer open. The bundle of letters waited. She untied the string again and spread them on the bed in order. The second letter was dated August 1986. Her mother's words bled with longing. I don't know why I'm writing.
He promised myself he wouldn't.
But every time I hear the train whistle at night, I think of Savannah, of that week when the world felt bigger than it was supposed to be. Emily pictured it, her mother, young and restless, standing on a station platform, feeling the pull of a life not chosen. The third letter was written 2 years later. By then, Linda had married and moved to a small town in South Carolina. She wrote of disappointment, of a husband who drank too much and left her alone too often. And again, Richard appeared between the lines, not named but present. Sometimes I imagine what it would have been like to build a home with someone who listened, who steadied instead of stormed. That thought keeps me awake, though I know it should shame me. Emily's throat tightened. She had never known this part of her mother's life. Linda had spoken little of Emily's father, except to say he wasn't worth the words. Reading these confessions, Emily felt both closer to her mother and farther than ever, as though she were meeting her for the first time in fragments. The fourth letter came years later, around 1992. By then, Emily herself was a baby. I see her sleeping, and I know I made the only choice I could. She is my life. But I think of you sometimes, and I wonder if you ever think of me.
I wonder if you've built a life worth the longing we wasted. Emilie Sandchuk.
She read the words twice, 3 times. Her mother had chosen her, yes. But she had also carried regret like a second child, heavy and secret. The last letter was the hardest. It was never sealed, never finished, the handwriting trailing off as though interrupted. I know this isn't fair, but if she ever finds you, the sentence stopped there. Emily stared at it until the ink seemed to blur.
If she ever found you.
She stuffed the letters back into the bundle, heart racing. Had her mother meant for her to discover them? Had Margaret kept them as proof of forgiveness, or as quiet punishment? And Richard, did he know these letters existed, tucked away in his late wife's drawer? Emily closed the drawer and pressed her forehead to the wood, breathing hard. The storm outside deepened, rain lashing harder against the glass. That evening, Daniel returned with groceries. He carried them in without a word. Emily followed him into the kitchen, trying to bridge the silence. I made chili, she said. Your favorite. He gave a curt nod. They ate with Richard at the table, but the old rhythms were gone.
Naughty, nos gentles conversations. Only the scrap of fork and the steady beat of rein.
Halfway through the meal, Daniel asked, What were you doing upstairs today?
Emilie froze.
Working. In Mom's room. His eyes locked on hers. I was just looking at some of her things. Richard's fork clattered softly against his plate. He glanced at her, then at Daniel. Leave it be, he said firmly. Daniel's jaw tightened. Maybe I should know what's in that room if it's so important. It's nothing you need to worry about, Richard said, his voice like a closed door. The tension at the table became unbearable. Emily excused herself, retreating to the porch with Frank the cat trailing behind. She sat on the swing, clutching the chain until it creaked, rain misting her face from the open yard. Richard appeared a few minutes later. He leaned on the doorway, arms crossed. For a long while, he said nothing. Then, you read them, didn't you?
Emilie's briscoqued.
She turned slowly. His eyes were steady, tired, but without anger. I didn't mean to, she whispered. But I couldn't stop once I started. He nodded once, as if he had expected it. Margaret found them. She kept them, though she never spoke of them again. I thought she had burned them. Maybe she wanted you to see. Emily clutched her knees. Why? Why would my mother write to you? Why keep them at all? He stepped onto the porch, the boards groaning under his weight. Because once, long ago, we cared for each other. That doesn't vanish, even if life takes us elsewhere. He paused.
Your mother was a kind of light.
But she chose her path. And so did I.
Tears stung Emilie's eyes.
And now?
What about now?
His face tightened, the muscles working in silence. Then he said quietly, Now we carry what they left us. And we choose not to repeat it. The words should have closed the matter, but instead they deepened her ache. Because even as he said them, the unspoken between them grew heavier, filling the porch with the weight of 2 lives circling the same forbidden gravity. When Emily went to bed that night, Daniel was already asleep, his back turned to her.
She lay staring into the dark, the letters replaying in her mind. If she ever found you.
She had found him. And she had no idea how to let go. Daniel's suspicion hardened over the next days. He wasn't cruel, not directly, but his words sharpened, and his silences felt heavier than any argument. He lingered near Emily more, asking questions disguised as casual remarks. What do you do all day while I'm gone?
Why do you keep going upstairs?
His eyes followed her in ways they hadn't before, measuring, searching. Emily tried to answer lightly, but the guilt she carried made even the simplest reply tremble. She avoided the drawer now, avoided Margaret's room entirely, but the letters pulsed in her mind like a heartbeat she couldn't silence. On a Saturday morning, Daniel left for town again. Emily tried to focus on her work, but she noticed he hadn't taken his duffel. A feeling of unease prickled in her. Hours later, when she went upstairs to fetch laundry, her breath caught. Margaret's room door was ajar. She pushed it open. Daniel stood by the dresser, the drawer open, the bundle of letters in his hand. His face was pale, mouth set in a hard line. He didn't look up when she entered. "What is this?" he asked quietly, though his voice carried an edge that made her stomach twist. Emily's throat went dry.
Daniel, I.
He turned, eyes blazing now. "They're from your mother."
To my father.
"Do you realize what this means?"
En shook. It's not what you think.
"She never sent them. They were just..." "Just what?" His voice cracked.
Love letters? Secret?
"You knew, didn't you? That's why you've been sneaking around here."
Emily felt a tear sting.
"I didn't know until I found them. I swear. I was as shocked as you." Daniel dropped the bundle onto the bed, pages fanning out like spilled water. "All this time I thought you and Dad were just awkward. And now I find out my wife's mother was in love with him? And you've been sitting here every night drinking tea with him." She stepped forward, desperate.
Daniel, please. Nothing happened.
"We didn't." He laughed bitterly. "Not yet?"
Or not ever.
The door creaked, and Richard appeared in the frame. He must have heard the raised voices. His gaze moved from Daniel's clenched fists to Emily's tear-streaked face to the scattered letters on the bed. His jaw set. "Enough," Richard said firmly. Daniel turned on him. "You knew, didn't you?
All these years.
You knew Mom kept these. You knew Linda wrote them." Richard's eyes didn't flinch. "Yes. I knew."
Daniel's face contorted, par furie, par grief.
"And you let me marry her daughter? You stood there at the altar knowing.
Richard stepped into the room. He knew the past.
"I didn't think it would repeat itself."
Daniel's voice broke.
"Didn't think? Or didn't care?" Emily tried to reach for him.
Daniel, listen.
But he pulled away.
No. Il veut listen de neuf.
He glared at his father, voice shaking. "I spent my whole life watching you sit in silence, never knowing what Mom saw in you. And now I find out you were living in another woman's shadow the whole time.
My wife's mother.
Do you realize how sick that is?" Richard's shoulders squared, but his voice stayed calm. "What you don't understand is that I loved your mother. Deeply. And she knew about Linda, and she forgave me. Because forgiveness is what holds people together when the world wants to tear them apart."
Daniel's log was low. Forgiveness?
"Is that what you call this?" He gestured wildly at the letters. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like betrayal, twice over." Emily's heart hammered.
Daniel, please.
"I didn't choose this. I didn't ask for it." But he turned on her, eyes full of hurt. "No, but you didn't run from it either. Did you?" The silence that followed cut deeper than any scream. Finally, Daniel snatched up the duffel he'd left in the hallway.
"I can't stay here."
His voice was raw. "I don't know what's worse, that my father once loved my mother-in-law, or that my wife sits here now, tangled in the same mess." "Daniel," Emily reached for him, but he shook his head. "Don't." His voice cracked.
"Don't follow me."
The slam of the front door reverberated through the house. Gravel crunched outside as his truck roared away, leaving silence behind like smoke.
Emily s'encontró the edge of the bed, shaking, the letters scattered around her.
Richard stood in the doorway, his face ashen. For a long while, neither spoke. Finally, he stepped forward, kneeling to gather the letters. His hands were steady, though his eyes were wet. He tied the string carefully, as though binding wounds. "I never wanted this," he said quietly. Emily pressed her hands to her face. "Neither did I." He set the bundle back in the drawer, closing it with finality.
Sommes-times the past poison, the présent nomatea au carefoulouillard.
Emily lifted her head, eyes burning. What if it's not just the past? What if it's us?
Richard briscoqued.
For a moment, he looked at her with the weight of all the things he wouldn't say. Then he shook his head, voice hoarse. Don't. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't know how to stop feeling it. He stood, straightened his shoulders, and left the room without another word. That night, Emily lay awake in an empty bed, the storm inside her louder than the cicadas outside. She thought of Daniel's face, twisted with betrayal. She thought of her mother's words, if she ever finds you. She had found him. And now the family she thought she was building was fracturing under the weight of secrets she never asked to inherit. The house was quieter after Daniel left, but not in the same way it had been before. Silence had once been the language of the place, an old steady rhythm that Emily had grown used to, even found comfort in. Now the silence was jagged, hollowed out by absence. Every creak in the floorboards reminded her of footsteps that weren't there, every empty chair a reminder of fracture. For 2 days, Emily moved through the house in a haze. She cooked simple meals, though she barely ate. She kept her laptop open but stared at blank screens. She tried calling Daniel twice, but both times the calls went to voicemail. She left one message, "Please just call me back," and then stopped trying. Richard went about his chores, quiet as ever. But Emily noticed the change in him too, the deeper lines etched into his face, the heaviness in his gait. They rarely spoke, except for necessities. Yet beneath the silence, a current hummed between them, an unspoken awareness that what had happened couldn't be undone. On the third night, Emily found herself in the sunroom again. The air was heavy, thick with the lingering scent of rain from a storm earlier that afternoon. She sat with her mug of tea, but it tasted different now, bitter, as if the leaves had soured. She stared into the steam until tears blurred her vision. Richard entered quietly. He stood at the threshold for a moment, watching her. Then he crossed the room and set an envelope on the table between them. "I wrote this for you," he said. Her heart thudded.
What is it?
He didn't sit down. "A letter. I thought words might be easier than this." His hand motioned vaguely between them. Emily hesitated, then picked up the envelope. Her name was written on the front in Richard's steady, precise handwriting. She looked up, but he was already turning to leave. "Wait," she said. "Why not just tell me?" He paused at the door. His voice was quiet, almost breaking. "Because some things are easier to put on paper. You'll understand." And then he was gone, his footsteps retreating down the hallway. Emily stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Inside, the pages were filled with his neat script. She began to read. "Emily, I never wanted you to find those letters. Not because they shame me, but because they are wounds from a life already lived.
I did love your motherance.
I loved her in a way that was both deep and impossible. Margaret knew, and she forgave me, and I chose the life I had with her. That was my vow. But those feelings never disappeared entirely, they only changed shape. When you came here, I didn't see you as her daughter.
I saw you as Daniel's wife.
I tried to keep you at a distance, for his sake and for yours. But I failed.
Somewhere between the silence and the tea, between grief and memory, I let myself see too much.
And I saw you, not as a reflection of the past, but as yourself. That is both my confession and my regret. I will not allow history to repeat itself. Whatever you think you feel, whatever I have allowed myself to feel, it must end here. You deserve more than a man bound by ghosts, and Daniel deserves more than betrayal.
I will carry the weight of this.
Please do not carry it with me.
Richard.
Emily's tears fell onto the paper, smudging the ink. She pressed her hands to her face, torn between relief and devastation. His words had carved boundaries she already knew were necessary, but they also confirmed what she had feared, that what she felt was not imagined. That the pull between them was real. The next morning, she packed a suitcase. Not much, just clothes, her laptop, a few essentials. As she zipped it closed, Frank the cat leapt onto the bed, watching her with unblinking eyes. Richard was in the kitchen when she came downstairs. He looked at the suitcase, then at her face. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Emily said, "I can't stay here.
Note like 10.
Richard nodded slowly. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the weight of the moment.
I understand.
She swallowed.
Where will he go?
I don't know yet. But I can't keep circling this. He stepped forward, placing a small slip of paper on the counter. There's a rental apartment above the bookstore in town. I know the owner. Tell him I sent you. It's modest, but it's yours if you want it. Emily took the slip with trembling hands. Thank you. Frank brushed against her leg then, purring loudly, as if sensing the shift. Emily bent to scoop him up. I'll take him with me, she said softly.
Richard Smoot curvait into the faintest smile.
He always did choose his own home. They walked together to the porch.
The air smelt of wet earth, the sky pale after the storm.
Emily set her suitcase in the trunk of her car. She turned back once more, her chest aching. I don't know if Daniel will ever forgive me, she said. Richard's eyes softened. Forgiveness isn't always about being together again. Sometimes it's about letting go. Emily nodded, though the words only deepened her sorrow. She wanted to say more, to thank him for the quiet kindnesses, for the tea, for the space they had shared even when it broke them. But no words came. Instead, she climbed into the car. Frank settled into the passenger seat, curling into a ball. She started the engine, gravel crunching beneath the tires as she pulled away.
In the rearview mirror, she saw Richard standing on the porch, shoulder straight, watching until the house vanished behind the curve of the road.
The bookstore apartment was small but clean. A single room with a kitchenette, a bed tucked beneath the window, and the faint smell of old paper rising through the floorboards. The owner, a kindly man named Henry, handed her the keys without question, only remarking, Richard said you needed a place. He's a good man. Emily nodded, throat too tight to answer. That first night, she sat on the narrow bed with Frank curled beside her. The hum of the town below drifted through the window, voices leaving the diner, cars passing, the faint strains of a guitar from a nearby porch. It was different from the heavy silence of the Miller house. It felt alive, but it also felt lonely. She unpacked slowly, placing her laptop on the desk, her clothes in the dresser. She found herself staring at the slip of paper Richard had given her, the one with Henry's name and number written in his careful hand. She folded it gently, slid it into her journal. Before bed, she made tea. Not the chamomile blend, just plain black tea from a tin she bought at the corner store. She drank it by the window, watching the town settle into sleep. The taste was sharp, unsoftened by apple or mint. It was not the same. But it was hers. As she lay down, the ache in her chest deepened. She missed Daniel, even in anger. She missed Richard, even in resolve. But most of all, she missed the version of herself who had arrived at the Miller house still believing life could be simple.
The clock in the bookstore below chimed midnight.
Emily closed her eyes, clutching the pillow. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, only that she had left, and that leaving was the first step toward something she could not yet name. Emily settled into the apartment above the bookstore, but settling was a generous word. She woke each morning to the sound of delivery trucks rattling past and the smell of fresh bread from the bakery next door. She worked from her laptop at the small desk by the window, Frank curled at her feet. At night, she listened to the creak of the building, the murmur of voices from the street below, and wondered if this life would ever feel like hers.
Days blurred.
She ventured into town for groceries, nodded politely at neighbors, exchanged small talk with Henry, the bookstore owner, who often slipped extra novels into her bag. Yet beneath every ordinary act lay the weight of everything left unresolved. Daniel didn't call. Not at first. The silence between them stretched into a week, then 2. Emily considered calling again, but each time she pictured his face in Margaret's room, his voice sharp with betrayal, she froze. What could she possibly say that wouldn't sound like excuse? It was Ruth who broke the quiet. One afternoon, Emily was browsing the shelves downstairs when Ruth appeared, carrying a basket of late summer peaches. Well, if it isn't the runaway bride, Ruth said gently, though not unkindly.
Emily flushed.
I didn't run. I just needed space. Ruth studied her for a long moment. Space can be good. But don't mistake space for answers. They're not the same. Emily touched the spine of a book absently. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Daniel won't talk to me. Give him time, Ruth said.
Men carry pride like armor.
Sometimes it takes a while before they realize it's heavy. Emily smiled faintly, though her chest still ached. She thanked Ruth for the peaches and carried them upstairs, slicing one into a bowl. The sweetness made her eyes sting with memory, Margaret's recipes, her mother's letters, Richard's steady hands. Everything seemed to circle back to what she had lost. That night, as the clock below chimed 10, her phone finally buzzed.
Daniel's name lit the screen.
Her heart lurched. She answered with a trembling hello. Silence, then his voice, low, uncertain. Emily.
Tears pricked her eyes.
I'm here. I didn't know where you went, he said. Dad said you left. That you needed time. I did, she whispered. I couldn't stay there. Not after everything.
Another pause.
She could hear traffic in the background, maybe the hum of a motel TV. I don't know what to think, he admitted. About the letters. About you and Dad. About all of it. Her throat tightened. There's nothing between me and your father.
Not in the way you think.
But I can't deny what I felt, what confused me.
I wish he could.
His breath hitched audibly. So it's true. You felt something. Emily closed her eyes. Yes. But I didn't want it. I tried to fight it. And it scared me, Daniel, because it wasn't about betraying you, it was about realizing how much I was already losing us. The line went quiet. For a moment, she thought he might hang up. Then he said, Where are you? Above the bookstore. Apartment Henry rents out.
Another pause. Then, il come tomorrow.
Emily's heart raced. Are you sure? I need to see you. We need to talk face to face. She whispered, Okay. When the call ended, she sat in the dark for a long time, Frank pressed warm against her legs. Tomorrow felt like both salvation and trial. The next day dawned clear, the first crisp breath of autumn edging into the air. Emily cleaned the apartment nervously, straightened books, swept floors, as though tidiness could soften the weight of what was coming. By late afternoon, Daniel's truck pulled up outside. She watched from the window as he stepped onto the sidewalk, hands shoved into his jacket pockets. He looked older, wearier, his usual easy grin replaced by something guarded. She opened the door. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Daniel said, Can I come in? She nodded, stepping aside. The apartment felt smaller with him inside, his presence filling every corner. He glanced around, then sat on the edge of the bed. Emily sat opposite, at the desk chair, hands folded tightly. I read all the letters, he said finally. Her stomach clenched. All of them. He nodded. After you left, I couldn't stop. I needed to know. And I hate them. I hate that they exist. I hate that Mom kept them. I hate that Dad let them sit there like some kind of secret shrine. Emily swallowed hard. I hate them too. But they were real. And pretending otherwise doesn't change that. He rubbed his face with both hands. When I saw you and Dad drinking tea, laughing together, I thought I was imagining things. But now, his voice cracked. I feel like my whole life was built on lies. My mom loved him, but she forgave him. My dad loved her, but part of him wanted someone else. And now I married you, and I wonder if I'm repeating their mess all over again.
Tears blurred Emily's eyes. Daniel, I don't want that.
I never wanted to repeat their mistakes. But I can't change that my mother wrote those letters, or that they tied me to your father in ways I never asked for. He looked at her then, eyes raw.
Do you love me?
The question hit her like a blow. She hesitated, too long. His face tightened. Yes, she whispered. But love isn't enough if we don't know how to hold on to it. You've been gone so much, Daniel. I felt like I was already losing you before any of this happened. He dropped his gaze.
Workes allez now.
I thought building something meant security. I didn't realize it was tearing us apart. They sat in silence, the hum of the bookstore's neon sign buzzing faintly through the floorboards. Finally, Daniel said, I don't know if I can forgive you. Not yet. But I don't want to give up either. Not without trying.
Emily's breath shook.
What does trying look like? He looked up, eyes wet. It looks like leaving Dad's house.
Starting somewhere new.
Just us.
No ghosts.
No letters. No tea. Her heart ached. I don't know if it's that simple. Maybe not, he said softly. But it's a start. They sat there, facing each other, the weight of history pressing down but not yet breaking them. Emily thought of her mother's unfinished letter. If she ever finds you, maybe this was the moment it had foretold, not to repeat the past, but to decide how to live beyond it. For the first time in weeks, Emily felt a flicker of hope. Fragile, uncertain, but real. For days after Daniel's visit, Emily felt like she was living between two worlds. By morning she returned to the routines of the apartment, coffee at the window, typing at her laptop, the muffled hum of life in the bookstore below. By night she replayed Daniel's words, his tired eyes, his question that hung heavier than any letter, "Do you love me?" He didn't stay that night. After their conversation, he had left quietly, saying he needed time. Emily hadn't asked where he was going, she sensed he didn't know himself. But his absence now felt different from before, no longer the neglect of work, but the distance of choice. On the third evening, he came back. She heard the knock, low and hesitant, and opened the door to find him standing there with no duffel, no smile, only a look that carried both weariness and resolve. "Can I come in?" he asked. She stepped aside. Daniel sat at the desk chair this time, leaving the bed to her. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. "I've been thinking," he said, "about us. About everything." Emily's heart thudded. She braced herself. "I keep asking myself," he continued, "why I married you. What I thought marriage was supposed to be. And I realized. I thought it was supposed to be easy.
You and me against the world.
But it wasn't easy. And instead of fighting for you, I let work be my excuse." Her throat tightened. "Daniel." He held up a hand.
Let me finish.
"I'm angry about the letters. About Dad. About you sitting in that house with him. But more than anything, I'm angry at myself.
Because he left you there.
I gave you space to find comfort anywhere but with me." Emily stared at her hands. "I didn't want comfort from him. Not at first. It just happened." "I know," Daniel said quietly. "And I hate that it did. But I also know this, you didn't leave me for him. You left because you couldn't find me anymore."
Tears stung her eyes.
She whispered, "I don't know if we can find each other again."
Daniel leaned back, exhaling.
"Neither do I. But I want to try." Silence stretched between them, heavy but not unbearable.
Outside, the street lamp flickered on, casting long shadow across the floor.
Finally, Emily asked, "What does trying look like?"
Daniel met her eyes. "It looked like living behind the ghosts."
"Dad's house, Mom's letters, all of it. It looks like starting somewhere new, just the two of us."
Maybe Atlanta again. Or somewhere else. Anywhere we can build our own life.
Emily thought of the Miller house, the quiet evenings of tea, the stormy night, the weight of Margaret's journals, her mother's unsent letters. She thought of Richard standing on the porch as she drove away, his figure framed against the fading light. Part of her would always remain there, tangled in that history. But Daniel was right, they couldn't rebuild on soil poisoned by the past. Her voice shook. "And if it doesn't work? Then at least we'll know we tried," he said. "At least we won't be living half-lives, haunted by what-ifs." Emily nodded slowly. Hope flickered in her chest, fragile, like the first flame of a match. The next week, she packed again. This time it wasn't escape but intention. She left the apartment above the bookstore with gratitude for its refuge, handing the keys back to Henry, who simply said, "I hope you find what you're looking for." Daniel met her with the truck, his duffel finally in the back seat. They drove in silence at first, the road stretching before them. Emily glanced at him occasionally, his grip on the wheel, his jaw set, his profile outlined by the fading sun. For the first time in months, she felt like they were moving in the same direction, even if the path was uncertain. They stopped by the Miller house once more. Emily hadn't wanted to, but Daniel insisted. "We can't leave without saying goodbye," he said. Richard met them on the porch. He looked older somehow, though it had only been weeks. His eyes lingered on Emily, then shifted to his son. Daniel cleared his throat. "We're leaving. Together. We need to try somewhere else." Richard nodded, his expression unreadable. That's wise. Silence stretched. Then Daniel added, voice rough, I'm still angry. About a lot of things. But I don't hate you. I don't want to carry that. Richard's eyes softened. That's more than I deserve. Emily felt tears sting as she stepped forward. She wanted to say something, but words failed. Instead, she placed a hand briefly on Richard's arm, a silent thank you for everything and nothing. He gave the faintest nod. Take care of each other. They left then, gravel crunching under the tires as the house receded behind them. Emily watched in the mirror until it vanished around the curve of the road, a chapter closing. Months later, in a small apartment in Atlanta, Emily unpacked boxes with Daniel. The rooms smelled of fresh paint and possibility. They argued over where to put the couch, laughed at their clumsiness with the bookshelf, ordered pizza on the first night. Life wasn't magically healed. Some days were hard. Trust had to be rebuilt slowly, like a bridge reconstructed plank by plank. There were moments when silence still stretched too long, when Daniel's temper flared or Emily's doubts resurfaced. But there were also moments of gentleness, shared dinners, long walks, the quiet of lying side by side without the weight of ghosts between them.
Emily kept a small box under the bed.
Inside were only two things, one of Margaret's recipe cards, the evening tea blend, and her mother's last unfinished letter. She didn't read them often, but she couldn't bring herself to throw them away. They were reminders of the past, yes, but also of the choice she had made not to live inside it. One evening, months later, as autumn leaves scattered across the city streets, Emily brewed chamomile tea. She sliced apple peel, added mint, stirred in honey. She handed a mug to Daniel. He raised an eyebrow. I thought we weren't doing tea anymore.
Emily smiled softly.
This time it's different. This time it's ours. He took a sip, then leaned back with a quiet sigh. Not bad, he admitted. They sat together in the glow of their new home, steam rising between them. And for the first time in a long time, Emily felt not haunted, but free. Because love, she realized, wasn't about choosing the easiest path. It was about choosing again and again, even after storms, even after ghosts. And in that choice, there was hope.